everybody, and welcome to episode 24 of the Shinesparkers Podcast. I'm Amanda Van Heil. I'm going to be your host today, and we have Darren here, along with Step, who is a member of the Shinesparkers team, who has been behind the scenes on the podcast, but new to being behind the mic, so to speak. Step, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for Shinesparkers?
Yeah, okay. So, as Amanda said, I'm Step, also known as Stephan Wells. I am a hobbyist musician, part of the Shinesparkers team. Sometimes I edit podcasts or do a bit of proofreading for the team, but probably, if anything, you guys might know me from some of the work on the Harmony albums that we've released on Shinesparkers.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Step. And we also have a very special guest I'm so excited to announce, Lawrence Schwedler. We are so happy to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've done with the Metroid series?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I had the privilege of working for Nintendo Software Technology for 12 years, and from 1999 until 2012. And one of my two favorite projects was that I got to work on as audio director there was Metroid Prime Hunters. And so I worked with my colleague, James Phillipson, who is, by the way, still at NST as the audio director. And I did the music and he did the sound effects, and we did that game, and it was awesome. It was super fun. Let's see, you wind me up and I'll just start talking, man.
Okay, sure. We got this.
I mean, if you want to look maybe a little bit of the history, like how it came about, some interesting anecdotes about video game development, Nintendo in particular, and Nintendo Software Technology, which is a relatively small developer here in Redmond, which is a subsidiary of a Nintendo Company Limited in Kyoto, Japan. And so the mothership, Nintendo, with a big N, oversees everything that NST does very closely. And when you're given a franchise like Metroid and given the green light to do a project, it's a couple of things. For one, it's a huge honor because you're like, oh my gosh, we get to do Metroid. And two, it's scary as hell because you need to now do something that was as good as what came before. And for anybody who's played any of the Metroid games, that's kind of a big shoes to fill. So the way it came about was we got the idea that we wanted to do it internally as a team, and our engineers were excited about doing a title for the Nintendo DS, which, the dual screen, that's what DS stands for. And the idea that you would have this game that was happening on two screens. At the time, it was totally revolutionary. And you guys are probably all too young to remember there was actually controversy before the Nintendo DS was launched. There were critics, I remember, at one E3, the big entertainment expo in Los Angeles that happens every year, and we'd always go and show our stuff. And when the Nintendo DS was first leaked before it actually was released, people were saying, well, you can't look at two screens at the same time. That's ridiculous. It'll never work. And of course, the Nintendo DS was totally revolutionary. I mean, you had two screens, so you had the action on the one screen, and you had the interface on the other, and it was just it was very effective. So we got the idea that we wanted to pitch to Nintendo, to NCL, that we wanted to do Metroid Prime Hunters, and to sort of sell them on the idea, we did a demo called, which ended up being released actually as First Hunt. And if you've played that, it's a kind of a mini version of the game. But it was actually our sort of proof of concept and our demo to show that we could do it. And we proposed, and they accepted, or actually I don't know who proposed it, but that would be released as a cartridge, as an actual cart, with the initial North American launch of the Nintendo DS. So it did. That came out. It was successful. People liked it. And of course, by that time, we were well in development on Metroid Prime Hunters. But it was a big task as to how to even approach the project. And so for First Hunt, we were sort of working on our own. And it's not in a vacuum, but without a lot of scrutiny. And we sort of did what we thought would be cool. And once we got approval to actually do the game, then we had to sit down and get serious and say, well, what are we going to do for the full game? And that's when I had the amazing privilege of having Mr. Kenji Yamamoto come to Redmond for like a week, as I recall. And we met with him, I think, every day or for quite a few meetings. James and I would meet with Mr. Yamamoto, and we just talked about what the Metroid franchise was, what his approach to music is. He was very, very supportive in letting me. I'm still kind of amazed to remember it, that he would let me sort of bring my own take to it. He didn't tell me exactly how everything had to be, but he did say that there were certain things that really had to happen. And one of those, I mentioned it, I think, when we spoke last in the interview for Shinesparkers, about specific use of melody as a game function, if you will. So, when you find an item, when you unlock a door, when you come to a new planet, there's melodies, short melodies that are associated with all these things. Now, Metroid isn't the first or the only franchise to do that in a video game. It's a Nintendo feature. The Zelda series has that as well. But in Metroid, it's quite specific. And I to be honest with you, I wasn't fully aware of that when we did First Hunt, and so I had a bit of a learning curve there to realize just what I was getting into. So there's your peek into the creative process, where things aren't always what you think they are, and then you actually go to do something big and you find out, wow, that's there's more to it than I thought. So that's how it started, and then I don't remember how long the development was on it. Maybe it was a year and a half, 2 years. I could be off by an order of magnitude, though. I don't really remember.
All right, Lawrence. So previously in an interview, which can be found on the Shinesparkers website, you talked about being an audio director and sound designer. And we still have some more questions for you because, well, we just can't get enough hearing about your work on Metroid and working with Nintendo. So in our interview, you explained how you entered the video games industry and your eventual role on Metroid Prime Hunters. But we do want to ask, given your experiences, how do people enter into the world of making music for video games today?
That's a great question. I wish I had a nice, straightforward, easy answer for you. It's changed a lot since I entered the industry, and for me, I got started in the 90s, in the mid-1990s, and things are a lot different now than they were. In some ways, they're better because there's a lot more games being made now, and there are a lot of indie games. So that's really a great way to get started, and I would say it's the way to get started, is to find a group of people who are making a video game. And with the tools today, between Unreal and Unity, you have one or two people who have some programming chops. You've got somebody who's got some game design chops. You got an artist who's interested in animation and art, and then you've got a composer, sound designer who can do sound. You can make a game, right? And people do it all the time. You guys, I'm sure you've played some of the great indie games. Just an example would be a game like Undertale. It came out some years ago.
Ooh, so good.
Right. I mean, just an amazing game. And so indie games is a separate classification of games from what we call the AAA space. AAA studios, those are the big studios like Turn 10 Studios at Microsoft making the Forza games, or 343 Industries, making the Halo games, or Bungie, or Blizzard, or those are AAA. And AAA studios can have audio teams, that have dozens of people on them just devoted to audio. And on the audio side, then you have content, and then you have programming, and implementation. So those sort of three aspects of audio production for video games. You have the people who are making the content, that's the stuff you hear, whether it's music or sound design or voice recordings. And then you have the people who are implementing those recordings, if you will, those assets, that content into the game. And those can be composer, sound designers doing their own implementation, or they can be audio programmers doing that implementation. And then you have audio programmers who are actually programming in UE4 or UE5, it would be in Blueprints. In Unity, it would be in C# or in the visual scripting language of Unity. And they're actually writing the code that makes all that stuff work. So you want to get started. You're a musician. Let's say you're not a professional musician, but you just dig music. You play guitar or piano or drums or whatever. Maybe you like writing some tunes, or you like remixing and stuff. Find a group of people that are making a video game. And a lot of times I don't actually know that process. I haven't had to do it because I've been lucky enough to be an audio director for AAA games, but I think you can find it on places like Kickstarter, right? And just on the web. Anyway, that part of it I don't know about, but find a team, just work with them. And the other way to get started is you do need to understand how the tools work. So a great place to start is just download Unreal or Unity. Unity is maybe a little easier to get started. Used to be. These days, Unreal is they're pretty similar in their ease of use. They're free to experiment. You can just download and use them. And download a DAW. Learn how to use a DAW. Reaper is my current favorite. It's what we use at DigiPen. It's not free, but it's only like $60, and you can use it free. You just have to click through the Nagware dialog boxes. The reason that I switched our program at DigiPen to Reaper was it's a newer DAW, and it's specifically designed. It feels to me like it's designed for video game audio production as opposed for record production. You can do record production and film scoring on it. I'm actually using it right now for an independent film project I'm working on, a short film. But it really shines in the game audio space, particularly batch processing. You can edit hundreds of files at once, regions. You can edit a voice recording using a strip silence feature that auto detects the gaps between sounds, and then have it automatically cut that into a bunch of regions, and then export those regions with a great deal of control over the file naming. So all of that stuff. Learn to use a DAW, right? A lot of people start out on the PC with a program called FL Studio. That one's really popular. Mixcraft is another one. On the Mac side, there's, of course, Logic Pro, which is a fabulous DAW. The nice thing about Logic Pro is it comes with all its own sounds. So without paying any extra money, just by buying a Mac and buying Logic Pro, you can have a whole virtual orchestra and a bunch of great drum and guitar and everything. Reaper is cross-platform, so it works on both PC and Mac, but it doesn't come with much. It comes with good plugins, good basic plugins, but it doesn't come with any virtual instruments to speak of. So that's kind of a threshold of entry. But in any event, if you're interested in doing this, you probably already use a DAW. You've already probably got your favorite DAW. By the way, DAW is DAW, Digital Audio Workspace, or Digital Audio Workstation, and it's just our way of referring to the software that records both microphone signals and virtual data, MIDI data for virtual instruments. So that's a way to get started, and you'd be surprised. Indie games really can get traction. Another venue for that is PAX. Is it PAX? Yeah, that's the Penny. It used to be called Penny Arcade Expo. That's a big conference that happens.
Yep, I was just there.
Were you just at PAX, Amanda?
Yes, I was.
How was it?
It was really good. I was on a couple of panels there, and it was a lot of fun. It was, since they don't have like a lot of the bigger names because of COVID, it still gives you a chance to play a lot of the indie games that you wouldn't normally get to play. So that I really enjoyed, getting to actually like talk to some of the indie game developers and played some fun games that way. Yeah,
I mean, PAX is the expo for indie games. Were you in the East Coast or West Coast?
I was just recently at the East Coast one. I've been to the West Coast one, but like PAX East, I think was like 2 weeks ago, and that's the one I was just at.
Okay. Yeah, I've never been to PAX East, so PAX West was the original one, I think. I think it started here.
Right, it was PAX Prime previously, and now it's West.
PAX Prime, right. And so that's here in the Seattle area. And DigiPen, the school that I teach at, is always very involved in PAX. We always have a presence there, and our students are always showing their games there. So it's PAX is a sort of very much embedded in DigiPen's game culture, but it's a great place to just meet other people who are working, particularly on indie games. They don't only do indie games, but and I know with COVID it's been a mess. Everything's been disrupted, but hopefully we're on the tail end of that, and we're looking forward for PAX West this year to be viable again and in person, hopefully, and all that. So DigiPen and my students and all will definitely be at PAX West. So if anybody's going to be there, I think it's August. Usually it's late August, right? So
yeah, it's Labor Day weekend. I'm most likely going to be there.
Oh, good. Well, yeah, you'll have to let me know, Amanda. Maybe.
Yeah, I'll have to come by and say hi.
Yeah. You definitely stop by the DigiPen booth there.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm not always at PAX, but I try to go at least from time to time. And this year, maybe I'll actually make it. But you can say hi to my students and my colleagues there. So yeah, so that's a great way to make connections. Is PAX, frankly.
Yeah, I've got to say, thanks a lot for the insight. This is actually a topic that's pretty close to my heart because when I first started with music production myself, before I first started, in my head, it was just this unreachable thing where only if you are in some professional band or label or anything of the sort can you actually make music. But I think with the advent of the internet and all of the resources we have online and all the software and everything, it's really kind of opened it up, which is, I guess, a double-edged sword because on the one hand, anyone can really go in and get started, which is, I think, a really wonderful thing. But on the other hand, it does mean a lot of people are doing it. It's a lot of competition, and it can be hard to, make yourself heard, I suppose.
It's true. It is. But, music has always been that way. The arts have always been that way.
Yeah.
People don't go into the arts, at least successfully, if they're doing it to make money. There's a lucky few people who make, a lot of money doing it. And by the arts, I'm talking about whether it's being an actor, whether it's being a composer, whether it's being a performer, a musician playing guitar or playing saxophone. So you do it generally, particularly musicians, I've found, do it mostly because they're just not willing to do something else, or they want to do it so badly that they're willing to kind of pay to do it. And by pay, I don't mean paying money, but it does work out to that, which is it's your time and energy, right? It's what you devote your lifetime to. And, you have to eat and you have to pay your rent. So if you're lucky enough to align those two things where you can eat and pay your rent by doing what you love, that's what a lot of us want to do. But it ain't easy, right? And so you really need to be dedicated to it. And I would say that it really, really matters. I guess it's maybe a function of love, a function of passion, as to how badly you want to do it. And one of the things you can do as a musician or as an artist to stack the deck in your favor is to be diligent and do your homework on your chop, right? On your skills. So you need to be the best musician you can possibly be. And it's not about showing up other people. It's just about your skills, right? If you want to be a composer, you need to compose music every day. It's like if you listen to a great guitarist like Mark Knopfler, let's just say, the guy from Dire Straits, just one of the greatest guitarists of the age. And I don't know his history, but if you talk to him, I'm sure you would find out that he, from the time he was pretty young, that he was playing guitar hours a day, just hours a day, every day. And because it is so competitive, you really you don't necessarily need to be a professional musician, but if you want to try to make a living in the arts or even just have your work get known, because it's so competitive, you need to be as good as you can possibly be. So it really does, I think it really is worth it if you have the passion and the desire, then to focus your energy into a diligent program where you say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to spend at least X amount of time every day or every other day getting better at what I do, right? And it's a choice. It's a choice we make, but yeah, it can be done.
And all that I really wanted to add to that as well is if you're looking to get into music and you don't know where to start, for me personally, and this is how I met Step actually, there's many communities online, and one that we used was Newgrounds, where there's lots of creative people come together, making music, making animations, all kinds of things, and just befriending people and see where that takes you.
That's a great point there, Darren. Exactly. It's there are venues, opportunities, networks now that are available that just didn't used to be there, and it can be daunting because there's so much of it. But it is really a very, very different landscape for somebody who's alive now and is young and is saying, this is my passion. I really want to do music. I want to write music for games. I want to do sound design. I'm interested in being a voice actor or whatever these things are. You have communities like Newgrounds, which I'm not familiar with, but it sounds exactly like exactly the right thing to do. So I would say that the networking, the community is crucial, especially if you couple it with the personal diligence of making sure that your skills are as good as you can make them, right? And it's not about you need to show other people up or that you're going to have to duke it out and find out who's the best, but you do have to take yourself seriously as an artist if you're going to do this, right? Because there's just too many people who want to do it, and there are too many people who are really good who want to do it really badly, just like you do. So I don't know if there's too many, but it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game like, well, if I make it, it means you don't make it. I mean, we can work together and we can make it. It really can be that with this sort of explosion of networking and the internet and indie games and the tools in particular. So it's not just your musical chops. Get familiar if you're interested in video games and you want to have something to do in making them, then again, I'd say download Unity or Unreal or both and just dig in. The tutorials, resources online are amazing. I mean, yes, you do need a decent computer. Any gaming computer, any gaming laptop is generally going to be probably good enough for development. So, you have to be able to run the games that you're making. And the software is pretty resource hoggish. So, you need a decent computer to run these programs. But just start working through the Unreal tutorials, right? Find that the resources are online. And then when you connect with other people who are making a game, that's going to give you a big leg up. Because you can say, oh, well, I've made this little demo, and people are like, oh, wow, you made a demo. Let's see it, right? So, the resources are there. Just take the initiative and make it happen.
Okay, so it brings me nicely on to the next question. Given your role as director of DigiPen's sound design degree programs, we felt that you'd be the appropriate person to highlight what a degree at an institute like DigiPen can offer compared to someone seeking to become self-taught through other means, such as tutorials on YouTube or in other places.
Great question. Let's see, a couple of, first a disclaimer. Obviously I'm biased because I'm direct DigiPen's music and sound design program, and I think they're fabulous. And I think if you could afford it, and you're serious about doing it, that's probably your best bet. So I'll just be honest. But I have a very biased view of that. But in general, to say what is the value of a college degree in A, in the arts in general, and B, in the video game industry in particular. So in the music business in general, let's say outside of video games, it used to be that a degree in and of itself didn't really matter too much, except for whatever wonderful things that you're going to experiences and knowledge and skills you're going to gain by getting that degree. But it wasn't in and of itself really a requirement. I mean, if you're going to audition for a band or an orchestra for sure or whatever, they don't really care what degrees you have. If you want to go teach at a college, then you have to have a master's degree, at least in the United States. That's just how it goes. So that's a different thing. But we're not talking about teaching. We're talking about actually either being a musician or, in this case, being in the video game business. So the degrees in themselves didn't used to matter. And in the video game industry, degrees, particularly in the sound engineering, audio engineering, and just game audio, even composer, sound designer, degrees in and of themselves were didn't used to be prerequisite, really weren't important. In fact, I don't think people really looked. I will be honest with you statistically now, and I have evidence for this. My colleague, Brian Schmidt, you might have heard of him, he runs another great resource. Again, it's kind of expensive. It's a yearly conference in Los Angeles called GameSoundCon, and look it up, GameSoundCon.com. Anyway, GameSoundCon, GSC. Brian Schmidt, he teaches at DigiPen with me. He's an amazing guy. And one of the things on the GameSoundCon website is really worth looking at is his statistical. He does statistical analysis. So of the video game industry in particular about sound. So he's interviewed all of the surveys every year of the industry, of the game audio industry. One of the things Brian found in his surveys about basically job openings in the video game business are these days, most companies, and this isn't necessarily indie teams, but certainly AAA studios, they're almost all now either require or strongly recommend a bachelor's degree in either audio engineering or music and sound design or music composition, or a music degree or an audio degree of some kind. So again, it isn't maybe a hard requirement, but that's a change that didn't used to be the case. One more piece to that, which is the value of it. Like, is it worth it, right? So it sort of depends on where you go. Traditional music programs in and of themselves are great, and that's what I did at UCLA. I got a bachelor's degree in music and guitar performance, actually classical guitar performance, which you wouldn't think would be very useful to be a game composer, a sound designer, audio director, but it was immensely valuable because all the things you learn as a musician apply to audio, because when you're dealing with audio, just music is just one type of sound. It's a very specialized and exacting, manipulation of sound. And then I continued for another 3 years for a Master of Fine Arts in classical guitar performance and electronic music. And the electronic music piece was what really helped me there. So, but a traditional 4-year undergraduate degree in music, as it's traditionally taught, at least here in the States, is not necessarily going to teach you what you need to do to make a living in the modern age of video game audio. And that's why we designed this program specifically at DigiPen to be a hybrid of traditional music training with audio engineering and recording, which there are many schools that teach that very often as associate's degrees. So that's another route. You can get a 2-year degree in associates and just learn to be an audio engineer. Those programs tend to be a little expensive, and the jobs in the recording industry are not as prevalent and plentiful as they used to be either, because of this explosion of technology. But still, that's another skill you need to have. And then the third piece that you need to have, so you got your musical training, you got your audio technology training, your music technology, audio recording and engineering and mixing. And then the third piece, which is very hard to find good programs that teach this, which is what we call implementation. And that's how do you take this stuff that you make in a DAW like Reaper or Logic Pro or whatever, how do you take your recordings, your data, your content, and get it to work in a video game, right? And so that brings up this whole issue of what we call middleware, audio middleware, and there are currently a couple of big prevalent software suites that deal with that. But as far as undergraduate degree programs that focus on that, they're very few and far between. And it was one of the reasons that we designed the DigiPen's program in music and sound design, because my experience was, well, all these people are going to spend 4 years in college and they're going to learn, how to play the trombone, and they're going to learn how to, read and write music. Well, they already had to read it before they could get into those programs, but still, they're going to learn how to maybe write some of it and how to teach it, and they're going to learn the history and literature of music, but they're not going to learn anything about recording engineering in many programs, although that's changing, and they're certainly not going to learn anything about audio implementation and game audio. So we designed a program that teaches all of that stuff together in a single, program, 4-year program, and then on top of it, it's in a school where you have students who are all there to learn how to make video games. So you get to work with programmers, designers, and artists to collaborate on video games, and we actually make video games. So anyway, it sounds like a sales pitch, but it's just how I see it. There are other good programs. USC has a fabulous games program. Berklee School of Music has more game audio offerings now than they used to. So it's kind of changing across the education industry, if you will, educational environment, that institutions are trying to retool and shift some of the curriculum to include this really new stuff. Things like Audio Kinetic Wise and FMod Studio. These are programs that we call audio middleware that you need to use if you're going to work in the industry to do this stuff. Qualify that. Those are tools that are they're called middleware because they sort of sit between the DAW and the game engine. There are new developments, and I was just speaking with the audio program director at Epic Games just yesterday, Aaron McLaren, and he was talking about the features of Unreal 5, which is just being released this year. And it has a new feature set called Meta Sounds. And with Unreal 5, you actually don't need to use audio middleware like Wise or FMod. You can just use Unreal's own native audio features, and they're incredibly powerful, and they're sample accurate, so you can get very tight synchronization. So that's another exciting development, and it's just another indication that all this stuff, it's changing by the month. Every month there's something new. So it can be discouraging on the one hand because it's like, how can I possibly keep up with this? But on the other hand, it's exciting as hell because these tools now allow you to do things from an audio design standpoint with adaptive music and things that we couldn't even dream of back in the day when I started.
One phrase that, I think it's passed around a lot in creative circles, I suppose, is it's not the tool, it's the user, so to speak, or it's not the tool, it's how we use it. I've really wanted to kind of pick your brain about this sort of topic, like how important is skill when it comes to, well, art in general, but specifically music? I am aware that you're someone that has worked in the past with very limited tools and had to really sort of leverage your skills to be able to make the Prime Hunters soundtrack for the Nintendo DS. So really that's what I've been wondering, like how much of it is the tool that you're using, how much of it is your own personal skill?
Yeah, it's a great question, Step. I don't want to sound like Yoda, but it's both are true, right? It's one of these crazy dichotomies. It's yes, the tools matter. Without the right tools, you can't do the job at all. So you need to have the best tools that you can afford and the best tools that you can get your hands on. Then you need to learn how to use those tools. As far as tools, now I'm not talking about your on the creative side, just you need to understand how to use the tools. But then it's a function of what is your creative ability as a composer or as a sound designer or as a dialogue recordist as well. What are the limits of your skill as to how well you can use those tools? So it really isn't an either-or situation. You need to have the most skills that you can possibly bring to bear. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, where it really behooves you if you want to take yourself seriously as a musician. By serious, I don't mean that you're going to play in Carnegie Hall on the piano. I just mean that you've done your homework and you've been diligent and disciplined to learn your craft, right? Amanda mentioned that she's studying martial arts, right? And martial arts is a great example. You don't just show up and say, I want to throw down somebody who weighs twice as much as me, right? I mean, you have to work at it and you have to know exactly how to do it and you have to practice it every day, right? So the skills really do matter because I can give you the best sound libraries and the best tools and the best pipeline, and the best support team. I'll give you awesome audio programmer and a great design team and awesome artists, to support you. But if you don't have a musical vision that's interesting, right? I mean, and B, the technical ability to achieve your vision, let's say if you're talking about music as a composer or as a sound designer, if you haven't honed your critical listening skills so that you can hear subtle differences in frequency and timbre, right? I mean, that's what it means to be an audio mixer, right? Is that you can tell what the difference between something that sounds good and something that sounds great. right? And then on the creative side of it, if you're a good composer, I think, and a good artist, then you can take tools that are limited. And Step, you were alluding to, I think I mentioned, I guess in the last interview about Metroid Prime Hunters, that on the DS, that I actually had to build my own sound banks. So by that, for those of you who are familiar with it, the way a sampler works, samplers used to be a common term. They're not so much anymore. Now they're all in the box and software plugins. But a sampler basically takes a recording. Let's say you record middle C on the piano, and you just make a little recording of that, and you edit it so that it loops seamlessly. So once it's playing, it can just keep on playing and sound nice, like that piano note. And then the sampler would then play that digital audio file back at a different sample rate to get the next pitch up. So if you wanted to play it an octave higher, you would just double the sample rate. So if you played the note A above middle C, it's 440 hertz, 440 cycles per second. And then if I play that same file back at twice the rate, at 880 hertz, it's going to be the A above an octave higher. So that's how a sampler would work, these short little recorded pieces of the musical sound. And so on Metroid Prime Hunter, I had to build those with the help of my audio programmer. He basically pointed me some tools and built a pipeline for me, but I had to assemble my own instruments. So these days, you don't really have to do that. You buy a library, right? I'll give you an example. A great one is the East-West sample library. It's a subscription, I think, for students. It's something like... what is it? I want to say $200 a year, I think. It's very reasonable. So and you get access to it's a full orchestral library. The Hollywood Gold, I think, are just including some solo instruments, and then there's the Raw and Silk, which are the exotic instruments, ethnic instruments. It's a sample library like that. It's unfortunately it's huge. It's like over a terabyte. That's 1,000 gigabytes of data. So you need to have fast hard drives. You need to have solid state drives, SSDs, and a decent internet. It takes days to download and stuff. But a sample library like that, you can take somebody with limited skills and come and compose something that doesn't suck, right? I mean, you could do it as long as you had some sense of melody. You could put something together, a nice little piano line, add a couple strings behind it, and you got something that's decent. But if you give that same tool to an accomplished composer who spent their life, working on their craft, they're going to give you a piece of music that's going to make you cry, right, or make you laugh, or make you scared. And so it's really both the skills and the tools. But it's I would sort of close out this topic by mentioning the great composer of the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky, gave a series of lectures years ago, Norton lectures, and he one of the claims he made in those lectures was that the more limitations you apply to the artistic process, the more freedom you have. Totally counterintuitive. I'll say it again. He said, the more constraints you give me as an artist, the more freedom I have to express myself. And it's the quote that I start my students off with every fall with my new crop of freshmen every year, and I call them Stravinsky's limits. And it's a really neat idea. It sounds a little bit odd at first, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. If you start with a blank canvas in front of you, if you like in Photoshop, and you've got every texture, every color in the book. You've got, the best photo libraries. You got all this stuff, and say, make something, make it beautiful. It's like, what do I do? As opposed to, I give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and I say, you've got 30 minutes. and let's say I give you an eraser too, and make a picture. Do something with that, right? So the creative approach you take to those two tasks are utterly different. And so when I open up a new DAW session in Reaper or Logic Pro, and I'm looking at just the instruments in the East-West library, and there's hundreds of them, right? And there's tens of thousands of samples, and hundreds and hundreds of just different instrument sounds. It's like you can just get blocked. It's just like, holy, I have no idea what to do. But if you say, okay, I need to compose a piece for oboe, harp, and bassoon. I don't know, that's a dumb combination. Oboe, harp, and trombone, okay? And it's got to be 5 minutes long, and it's got to have a fast section and a slow section. All of a sudden now, I've got something to do. I've got someplace to start. I kind of know what I need to do. So the tools alone aren't the answer, but great work. It's easier to do great work if you have great tools.
Well, that was an excellent answer. I honestly, I had the widest smile on my face when you mentioned the Stravinsky limits, so to speak, because those are words that I actually live by myself. I think they apply to a lot more than we would imagine. I think they apply to anything in general in life. If you just go in there without a goal and without constraints to keep you sort of grounded, then you end up overwhelmed and not sure where exactly to go. You end up directionless. So that was definitely really insightful to hear. As a follow-up to that, actually, I was wondering if you experienced that at all, maybe a boost to your creativity or a boost to your ability to think outside of the box in creating the Metroid Prime Hunters soundtrack. Because obviously you were working with a very limited set of sound banks. You knew exactly what sounds you were working with or what you were creating. And all you could do then is send performance data to them. How do you feel like that affected the soundtrack in the end and affected your creativity during the process?
Yeah, that's another great question, Step. So I don't think it was Metroid Prime Hunters. It might have been for me a couple of projects before that. I'm trying to remember now. But at any event, it might have even been on Hunters. One of my requests to my technical team and to my audio programmer was I need to be able to play my keyboard, my MIDI keyboard, and hear the sound that I'm the instrument that I'm writing for out of the Nintendo DS. I need to actually hear my sound bank. I said I can't. I could, but if I have to work where I'm writing my music and then I have to export it as a MIDI file and then play it back and hear it on the DS. You understand the difference, right? I mean, I want to be able to hit the key on my keyboard and hear it out of the DS speaker.
Yeah.
As opposed to creating the thing in my DAW and let's say having it sound pretty good, because even with a crappy sample bank, something on your computer, it's 44, 0.1 kilohertz. It's a high sample rate. It's 16 bits. It's a good rich sound, even if the sound itself isn't great. But by the time I get down to the DS, if you guys remember the Nintendo DS and the little speaker on there, and of course it's more than just the speaker. It's the fact that now it's literally playing out of the sample bank that had to fit in 200 or kilobytes or whatever. I might have been a little bit more than that, but these were small. I said I need that real time throughput, or I just don't know if I can really do my best work. And so what they did was they actually found that Nintendo, for its developers, and this was way back, now they've got much nicer tools and everything. But at the time, they had just released this add-on for the SDK, and SDK stands for Software Developer Kit. So this is hardware and software that developers use to develop a game for a console, and it's still a thing. Like the PlayStation 5 SDK is really expensive and it's hard to get, and they won't even give it to you unless you pay a whole lot of money, and you also have to be vetted, and so it's a big deal. SDKs are a big deal, and Nintendo's were no different. But back in that day, they had an add-on which allowed you to plug it into the development kit, which was this blue box that sat on my desk that was connected to the computer, but it looked like somebody had just made it themselves in their lab. It was like a little circuit board, and it had a MIDI port on it. It actually had a plug where you could plug a standard 5-pin DIN cable, a MIDI cable into it. So I plugged my MIDI output. I did it from my DAW, so I could use it through the computer, but I could have just plugged it straight from the keyboard into this thing. And then once I had loaded my sound banks, now I could play the sounds and hear them out of the DS, the SDK, the machine right there, including out of the headphone jack if I wanted. So I could also hear the difference between what came out of the headphones and what came out of the speaker of the DS. And so that limitation of the custom sound banks, I was able to mitigate by being able to hear the stuff in real time. So it did. Your question about how did the limitations of the this constraints shape my creative process? It did in that I had to. The process was I would come up with what I thought I wanted to do. Let's say, okay, I'm gonna need some for this piece. I'm gonna need some drums, and I'm gonna need some sort of electronic drums. Let's say, and then I'm gonna need a synth, and because it's for the ice world or the whatever, I'm gonna need some spacey synth that I know a synth sound. So I would build the sound bank and get it onto the system, into the SDK. So now I could hear it. I could hit a keyboard, a note on my MIDI keyboard, and I could hear this synth sound. And I hold it down, okay. And that was days of work just to get the sound. But now I've got a synth for Alinos or whatever it is, whatever the world is. And then now it's like building my little orchestra. So now I know, okay. But I had to decide, well, my song, this piece of music is going to use these 5 instruments because the memory limitations were rather extreme. So that's why I said, okay, this piece is going to have these 5 instruments. But once that was working, now I could be at the time, I guess I was working in, I'm trying to remember now, Logic Pro, or it might have been Pro Tools. But anyway, which sending MIDI data into the DS SDK, and then hearing it out of the speakers. And that was... It sounds constraining, but it was really liberating because of that whole notion of these Stravinsky limits, because now I had my little orchestra. I've got my 5 instruments, and I'm not going to think about, if I can't just go to my plug-in thing in Reaper and pick a different instrument, right? If I wanted a new instrument, I was going to have to make one from scratch, which would take another day or two. So there were times when I said, okay, well, this song to really sing is going to need another instrument, and then I would add another instrument. But because of those constraints, that very much influenced how I approached the music. And then it is liberating because once I had my little sound bank, my little orchestra, then it was like, now it's just up to, well, what can I do with my brain and my fingers to make something sound cool within these boundaries?
That goes back a long time, doesn't it, as well? Was it 2005, I think it released? So
I think it was, 2004 or 5, something like that. Or did it maybe first Hunt and then 2007? Anyway, I can't remember when Hunters...
Yeah, First Hunt shipped in 2004, I think, and then Hunters was 06, if I remember correctly. Because I think there was a slight delay on the launch. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, well, the DS launch was, that was a hardware launch. So that's another interesting aspect of that project. And that wasn't the only launch title. A launch title is a game that is shipped at the same time as new hardware. And we're talking consoles now. So PC games don't have this issue, right? Everybody's just, you got your PC, you can upgrade it every year or whenever, but Steam is Steam or whatever, or Microsoft or PC games. But with the consoles, the games are built for those consoles. And with Nintendo specifically, it's what they're known for. We were engineering and designing our games for the hardware, and that's why the original Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time was so amazing. Was that all the creative team and the engineers at Nintendo are working to make a game that takes advantage of their hardware that nobody else knows, like what's actually under the hood and in the box. So. A launch title is really, really way more pressure than a regular title because you are absolutely constrained. There is no slip. You can't slip. I mean, if the hardware slips, well, then your game would be delayed. But you wouldn't know that anyway. So you set the hardware launch has to be set at least 2 years in advance because there's the development itself, and it's kind of like building the train tracks in front of the train because they can't wait until it's done before they market it, right? Because then they'd be releasing it a year or two after it was done. So they have to start announcing it and preparing for it and just preparing for distribution and marketing, months and months and years in advance. So once you have a launch date for hardware, which we did, which the DS was going to launch in either September or October of whatever year it was, and then they said, well, we're going to bundle. This was actually First Hunt. This was not Metroid Prime Hunters, right? First Hunt was going to be bundled with the hardware. So we did that with the GameCube as well. Wave Race Blue Storm was a launch title for the Nintendo GameCube. And the pressure that puts on the team, I can't tell you. you want, it's already a nail biter just to work on it, for a big studio or an important studio, AAA, and knowing the money and the reputations at stake. But then you put a hardware launch on top of it, because you can't slip, right? And you guys know that software development is notoriously slippy, right? It's just like, yeah, it's going to be ready, and then it's like another 6 months go by. Yeah, it's going to be ready in 6 months, and another 6 months go by, right? You can do that if you're just, some teams can do that. There's a cost to it, but they can do that. But you can't do that with a hardware with a launch title. So that was First Hunt, yeah.
Couldn't let you go away without talking about Pokemon Puzzle League, because that was a game that I really enjoyed growing up, and I know it's one that Amanda really likes as well, because we were talking about it before we recorded.
I love it so much. Oh my gosh.
So I'm just curious, just on an off sort of topic, I guess. What can you tell me about what that game was like when you worked on that?
Sure, yeah. It has an interesting background. It was one of the first games I worked on when I joined NST in 1999. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was already in development. And it had an interesting backstory in that it was another game. It was based on a game called Panel de Pon, and I have no idea what that even means, but it's Panel de, D-E, Pon, P-O-N. And the development team at NST had made this game, Panel de Pon, I think. A little fuzzy on this. This goes way back. But it was this, we wanted to basically, we had the code base, and I think our engineers had written it, but had made this game called Panel de Pon. And then the option or the idea came to basically use the Pokemon franchise for this game, which, by the way, is a puzzle fighter. It's an interesting game genre. If you've never played a puzzle fighter, you got to check it out. It's really fun. So it's 2 players, and the single player version looks like a lot of of mobile games now, like Candy Crush and stuff, where you've got fields of grids of things that are dropping and sort of in a Tetris-like way kind of happening. But it's a puzzle fighter, so it means you've got 2 players and you're both trying to clear your fields as these blocks come down, and by getting rows and combos and stuff. But when you succeed, then we call it, you throw garbage on the other player, and so these now more blocks go on there. So it's a very active battle type game, and you wouldn't think of it. It's like, well, it's a puzzle game, but super fun, very fast paced. And one of our designers, Brett Ballou is his name. I don't know what Brett's up to these days, but I used to tease him. He was so good at the game. It was amazing, and you could play against the machine too. So they had there's the AI mode, and they have to tune that, right? So because it's AI, right? The machine can always win. Anyway, he was so good at it. He used to say that he could feel I could never tell. I think he was pulling my leg, that a certain spot on his forehead would kind of get warm when he was playing this game too much, because it's this weird kind of, it's not conscious thought, right? You guys know that conscious thought takes like 1/3 of a second. If anything that you choose to do consciously takes about 1/3 of a second to do. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Instinctive reactions bypass the prefrontal cortex, and so that's what soccer players and sports people and musicians use to respond instantaneously, but it's not conscious. So to play this game properly, you're definitely using that part of your brain, and his part would get hot. but the N64, I was talking about having to build my own sound banks for the DS. It was like that. Even though you could use pre-recorded wave data, the memory banks were quite small. So that was my first taste of having to build all my own sound banks, which was on Pokemon Puzzle League. And I had never done it before. And to be perfectly honest with you, I didn't do a very good job of it. The sound banks on that game do not sound great. It was my first time out. I mean, they had just hired me, and I was like, oh, I have to build my own sound. I couldn't believe it. I thought they were like, just gaslighting me or something. I mean, it was like, really, I can't just get a commercial library. Just give me a general MIDI library, that's just got, whatever. I don't even need all the instruments. And it's like, no, you have to build your own. And so that was crazy. And the really fun thing about I somehow did it. And like I say, I don't think that my sound banks on that game sound that great, but we did it. But here's what happened. It was when we got the franchise, I flew to New York with our producer, Yukimi Shimura, and the art art director at the time, Michael Harrington, and we flew to New York to meet with the company that were doing the localizations for the Pokemon Saturday morning cartoons, the Pokemon cartoons, which is a company called 4Kids Entertainment. The number 4 Kids Entertainment. And so I still remember meeting in this at their offices in like Midtown Manhattan. It was like really, wow, I'd never flown on a business trip before. So it was pretty exciting. And we met with them and talked about it. And we had a producer from Nintendo of America with us. And I did some horrible gaffe where the director said something like, well, we might, one thing we could do, we're going to use Pokemon voices for this game, right? As sound effects. We could do real-time voice concatenation. And that's sort of like where you put pieces of phrases together. And I've done a good bit of that. I did some of that at UCLA and working on it on other games. And I knew how hard it was. And I made the mistake. And if you ever do get a chance to be in a corporate meeting, don't ever just naysay something that your boss says as a possibility. Just keep it under your hat and tell them later, right? But don't do it in front of the client. And I said, well, real-time voice concatenation it's a real pain, and I think with the technical abilities of the N64, it's probably not what we're going to want to do. And I just remember she just gave me a stare like, oh my gosh. I was like wondering, do I still work for this company? I felt so bad because I just, I was speaking honestly, but it just wasn't the time and place for it. So we didn't do real-time speech concatenation, but we did do was 4Kids gave us all of the voice recordings from the Saturday morning TV shows for all the Pokemon characters that we were using in the game. And these voice recordings are the original ones that are all recorded by Japanese voice actors in Japan for the original, the cartoons are made in Japan, and then 4Kids would localize them, right? They'd replace all the Japanese dialogue with English dialogue. But the Pokemon voices are not English, they're just Pokemon language. So they're there. And so we got this amazing treasure trove of high resolution samples, right? 44 kilohertz stereo, 16-bit, recorded of all these Pokemon, Scyther and Gloom, 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 Gloom. And I mean, they're burned into my brain because I had to work with them for a year and a half trying to get them all to fit into the game. And, Pika Pika and all those things. So we it was my job then to in the gameplay then the sound effects were the sound effects of the Pokemon, and it was sort of arbitrary. Each when you played against an opponent, you each sort of chose your Pokemon. I think I can't remember now, but so the Pokemon aspect was not integral to the gameplay. It was this puzzle fighting game that was quite abstract. But we laid the Pokemon franchise on top of it, and then the music was really turned out to be one of the hardest things I ever did. They wanted to use all the original music from the TV series. And so 4Kids got all, and there was a whole bunch of composers that did this. It was a long-running series, and they had all this different music. And, well, we said, we can't put this recorded music in the game. There's no room on the N64 for it. So it's going to all have to be MIDI. And it's like, oh, my God. And you're going to have to build the sample banks for it. So I had to build sort of a general sound bank that could accommodate like orchestral. And if you listen to the cartoons, the music's pretty good. I mean, it's like TV music, right? Yeah. TV cartoon music. So the composers, each composer sent to 4Kids, and they sent me MIDI files of their from their production music. Can you imagine that? I mean, but they're all using different libraries. So it was, and then I had to map them onto a custom sound bank. It was just really a nightmare. And the fact that I did it at all and that it works and you can hear those tracks, and if you're a fan of the cartoons and you play that game, you'll hear that those are indeed the right tracks. But, if I were doing it now with the tools and, material, the hardware and software that's available now, you can make it sound really good. Sure. But it was pretty primitive. It was hard.
I definitely remember playing Pokemon Puzzle League when it was new and being so excited that it was the music from the TV series.
Yeah.
Really? And you weren't like bummed that it just sounded like this crap ass MIDI that didn't sound very
No,
good?
I loved it. I was like,
we were
this
like
is great.
10. It didn't matter to us. It was just fun. We enjoyed it.
Right.
It was so exciting. Like I loved it. I didn't care.
Well, that's such an interesting thing, Amanda, because when you work for a company and you do this stuff and you're something somewhat isolated and you're not allowed to talk to press or anything, and you're not allowed to talk about it, you have to set your standards high and you have to do the best job you can. And then you get a review that criticizes, which I did. I think I got some bad reviews. I can't remember now, but it's a weird thing. And it's really nice to remember that a lot of times, the work that we do is really appreciated by people, whether or not, every critic thought it was great. I maybe brought a smile to the face of, some kids out in the world. And it's like, that's such a cool thing. It's a real privilege to know that that's how it went down.
Yeah, there were so many times I'd be like, oh, that's the music from the cartoon. This is so cool. And I was like 14 doing that. I didn't care. Like, I was like, this is great.
We also had characters like Professor Oak and stuff in there just talking.
Yeah, I got to be Misty, so like that was just the greatest ever.
Right, they were just little phrases, right? We'd have like I'm trying to remember who was the character. She was kind of like, I think she was psychic, but she was kind of
Sabrina,
yeah, and Sabrina would say, "Play with me." Play with me. And we had 3 versions of play with me. And that was just what you said when you chose Sabrina to be your whatever character for that round, And yeah, boy, all of those things are just burned into my brain. If I heard him now, they just
I would always get my brother-in-law to play with me, and he always played as Lieutenant Surge because Jolteon sounded like Homer Simpson because he would say Jolt, and he's like, it sounds like he's saying Doe. So I'm going to say I'm going to be Lieutenant Surge because he sounds like Homer Simpson.
I'm Lieutenant Surge.
I know. Sorry to anybody listening. Like, I know this isn't Metroid, but this is a thing from our past here, our childhood. So we had to ask this. It's just, I was amazed. I only found out like looking through the discography of what you'd done before, doing a bit of research and just looking up the things that you'd done. And when I saw Pokemon there, I was like, wow, that's like 2 series, Metroid and Pokemon, that I love. And knowing that you was involved with that, I had to bring it up because it's such a cool game from childhood. I don't know how it stands up today. I haven't played it for a long time, but it was a fun game at the time, and I really enjoyed playing it. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
Well, I tell you, as a game, it's a kick-ass game. I mean, if you play that now on the N64, it's as good a puzzle fighter as there's nothing as any better. I'm not saying that out of pride or propriety. I mean, like, I did that. It's just it's an excellent puzzle fighter. The N64 controller is awesome. It's a simple enough game where there's no lag or latency or anything. So I would argue that, and I can say this because I did the sound on it, that the sound it sounds dated. I will mention that if you played as Mewtwo, the character Mewtwo, right? His music, that was the one of the few tracks on there that I actually wrote. So that's actually one of my compositions. Almost all the music in that was from 4Kids, from the television series. But we needed extra music, and they said, yeah, go write some music. So I wrote my own. The Mewtwo theme is mine, and because I was building in my own sample banks, I actually recorded electric guitar licks that are in there. So if you listen to it, it's not distorted guitar. It's a very clean kind of it sounds a little like Mark Knopfler kind of sound. And there's these guitar licks and you can hear that they repeat. It isn't just like this long solo because there wasn't memory for that, right? So I recorded maybe half a dozen licks and then composed a piece of music around it. So when you play Mewtwo in Pokemon Puzzle League, you'll hear me playing my Stratocaster.
I'm hoping now that we've got the Nintendo Online service for Nintendo 64 games, hopefully that will be one of the games that comes to Nintendo Switch and people can enjoy that game all over again.
I hope so.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear about that. That'd be cool.
Well, they're adding like a game every month, and I think inevitably we're going to get some Pokemon-related games on there if the Pokemon Company will have the license for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's always the worry there. But yeah, I'd love to see more people play that game. And wouldn't that be great, just to revisit that after all those years?
It's a great puzzle fighter. It's a super, if you like that kind of game, and it really is fun because you talk trash to each other while you're playing it, and you throw these big combos when you do a big combo, and this whole line of blocks goes, and the dust flies on the screen, and your character looks like worried and like being crushed under these blocks, looking up, sweating, drops of sweat coming off of their face. Yeah, fun game.
All right, well, now it's time for the group discussion. And this episode, we're going to be talking about adaptive music in video games, which is a pretty popular topic in gaming right now, and how it can really shape the gaming experience. It makes the game just so much more immersive. And so we're going to talk about some of our ideas for adaptive music and how it could be used to create some really cool experiences in Metroid Prime 4 and further Metroid games.
I have to put a disclaimer here, which is that adaptive music it's why I got into it's what drew me into this field. I've been obsessed with it for all of my professional life, and now I teach it in a 4-year program at DigiPen. So if you thought I was long-winded before, oh my God.
Bring it on.
It's going to be but I'll try to be a little more succinct. So, all video game music is adaptive by definition, as opposed to film or television music. So, when we talk about writing music for picture, to go back to films, right? There's films, and originally they didn't have any sound, and then they had sound, and once they figured out how to synchronize the sound with the picture, that was a big deal because now you could have the sound would actually line up with the action, right? So it sounds like a trivial technical exercise, but it wasn't. It was a big deal. So people who write music for film and television are writing what we call linear media. Every time you play that bit of media, that film or television clip, and it could also be a cutscene in a video game, by the way, a pre-recorded cutscene, full motion video we used to call it. It's the same. Every time you hear it, it's the same, right? The door opens, the woman walks in, and the birds fly out, and the Alfred Hitchcock's birds, and it sounds the same every time you watch that scene. So in a video game, every time you play the game, it's up to you as the player to determine how long it takes you to get through a level, or whether you go when you go from the menu into the game, or when you hit the pause button, or anything. Every time you hit a button and do something in a video game, and the entire game reacts to what you did. It could be trivial, like jumping, making Mario jump, or it could be complicated, like hurting your Pikmin at the end of the day in Pikmin 1, and the sun is going down, which that game had a time limit on it, so the end of the day mattered, and the music changes, the lighting changes, and there's a lot that's happening just because of what you did or didn't do at that moment. So all music for video games is adaptive in that it isn't a linear score that sounds the same every time. Now, parts of it may be indeed pre-rendered and sound exactly the same. When you're in the overworld, you are hearing the Mario theme every time, and it's and you're hearing that music exactly the same let's say in the original game. But as you've played more and more of the Super Mario Brothers games, and you see it's like, oh my gosh, and now I'm playing 10, 20 years later in the franchise. Now, when every time the Goombas are walking by, they're all basically bouncing to the beat of the music. It's like, holy cow, wait a minute, how are they doing that? What is it? And when you jump on them, you're jumping onto with the beat of the song. It's like, wait a minute, how is that happening? So adaptive music simply means that it's that the music is changing based on real-time input from the user. But modern games, because we expect more now than there used to be. Now it's gotten much more sophisticated, right? So the density of the music texture reflects how many enemies are on the screen, right? If you're fighting 3 enemies, it's you're just hearing let's say the strings and the woodwinds and a little bit of percussion. But now when there's 4 more enemies join the battle and now you're really under siege, all of a sudden now the percussion track has swelled into a big old rocking rock drums thing. And now when the big boss appears at the end, now all of a sudden the brass section comes in and you hear this French horns and bass trombones blaring out. So that kind of sophisticated adaptivity requires a whole lot of technical support on the back end from the tools and from the engine. And it also requires what we call music design, which is a new thing, as distinct from music composition. So for many, many years, hundreds of years, composers have been composing music, but they've been doing it for the most part for a linear medium. It's not until you get into jazz improvisation that you start to get into adaptive music, right? Now you're talking about real-time adaptivity, and you could argue that certain folk music is that way too, where you're in real time, you're changing the music in response to what the other musicians are doing. But as far as video game music goes, to have the music change seamlessly and naturally based on what happens, that's the new thing that's happening in modern adaptive music, and that's where the challenge is.
Yeah, so adaptive music changing up the sound of the game to suit the mood of what you're playing. It just enhances the whole experience of the video game for me. A recent game that I played, which this was done really well, I felt, was Hades, which was composed by Darren Korb. You just enter a room and it's very chill, laid back battle. It's just like a small minor, a few enemies here and there. And then everything goes kind of ambient and quiet. And just moving between each room, it changes. It's like a constant track that's always there, but it's changing, and it's so subtle that you don't really notice it. And then all of a sudden, that theme will grow into a big boss battle, and you've got like guitars and drums and and the sound effects will increase, and it's really effective. It feels like it's always constant, and during those kind of ambient moments, you have more spoken dialogue, so it doesn't really get in the way of the music, and you can hear it a bit more clearly. Another one for me is the Monkey Island series, composed by Michael Land, and just an early example of how music can change between locations, such as Guybrush entering a room on a ship and then going back outside, and you have a kind of an inside and outside, but the theme is constantly playing, and you just sort of switch between the two, so it doesn't sound jarring. It sounds like it's a constant, like it's always there with you, but it's so subtle that you don't really notice it too much. Another example, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze with David Wise, and even Banjo-Kazooie by Grant Kirkhope, just having the option where you jump into the water, for example, and you have the sort of overworld theme, and then you go into the water and there's an underwater version of it, but it's so seamless. And it really sort of, it just brings you into that whole world, and it just feels fantastic, and that's what I really want to see from a Metroid game. Just having that applied to, just imagine like Samus flying through her ship in space and going through the atmosphere, and the planet comes into view, and you get this sort of city or something, and the music will change, and it will adapt, and it will move into this sort of big, more majestic sound. And I love the idea of all of that, and bosses, and just maybe the music will change subtly the closer that you get to the boss room, and you'll have that prompt, that sound prompt, to know that something more intense is coming. And I think that's a really good direction for Metroid in the future, but also all video games, really. I think it's such a fantastic way of experiencing the sound of a game. I'd love to see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. Like, adaptive music is definitely another topic that's really close to my heart. Although I kind of want to play a bit of devil's advocate over here, and I'd be really interested in hearing your opinion on this as well, Lawrence. One thing that I do know about adaptive music is it is definitely something that is very difficult to do, because, well, music tends to be quite rigid and structured. You can't just be playing Metroid and walking around, and then there's the ambience theme in the background. Then all of a sudden you find a space pirate, and then battle music comes on just like that, and then expect it to be seamless. It won't be seamless. You can't, fit another song over a previous one that's already playing, just without any consideration on the timing and on whether the songs work together or anything like that. It is quite difficult. And from my experience, at least, sometimes I've noticed, like I was playing another game, Guild Wars 2, with the soundtrack composed by a lot of people, but I know this particular soundtrack I'm going to mention is by McLean Diemer. So in one of the expansions of the game, I noticed that they introduced sort of adaptive music, a very basic kind of it, where when you finish fighting whatever foe you're fighting and the battle music would have been playing, it stops, but instead of just fading out, it introduces a sort of ending note, a sort of percussive hit to finish it. And I noticed this, and I was telling my friends who might not be necessarily as musically inclined. Did you guys notice this? Listen to how the battle music is ending. And nobody actually realized it was there. I feel like a lot of the time, a lot of work goes into it, and it's something that people might pick up on subconsciously, but not necessarily something that people can say, hey, this is in the game, and I really like and appreciate the effort that went into it. So what I'm really wondering is, what kind of defense can we bring to say, hey, adaptive music is actually really important. It's something that is more than worth the effort involved.
Yeah, great question. You brought up a couple great points, Step. There's a wonderful guy on the internet named Scruffy, if you haven't seen his stuff. And there's a video he did that I show in my class called Invisible Sound Design in Breath of the Wild. And so when right, Amanda? Right? Like,
yeah, I was like, totally, that Breath of the Wild is going to be what I'm talking about. So, yay.
Yeah. But he uses the word invisible sound design, and the video is brilliant. It's about 10, 12 minutes long, and he culminates with a thing that's so subtle that I had to listen to it twice to even hear what he was talking about. But once I heard it, was like I couldn't miss it. And I'm a musician and a composer, so it's like, if it's that subtle to me, and if I had, and I played Breath of the Wild, I played it, I won't tell you how many hundreds of hours I played it just to beat the main storyline once, right? Forget the DLC. But it's so subtle, and it's like Step is saying, is it worth it, right? And I can assure you that from anybody who does this for a living, that we say that it isn't worth it for its own sake. It isn't worth it just to do it to be clever or to be technically sophisticated. But if it serves the story and if it serves the experience, you bet it's worth it. And just because somebody who's not focused on it doesn't notice doesn't mean that they didn't notice. It just means that they can't tell you that they noticed. So there's all of this stuff that happens with music and sound that's subconscious, and that's just below, it's subliminal, it's right below the level of perception, and so those drum hits that you heard in Guild Wars that were just finishing out the phrase at the end, the only reason they didn't notice them is because they worked. So it's almost, if adaptive music is really working right, you don't notice it, you just feel that it was somehow scored for your experience. And that's what we as adaptive composers want to have happen. We want it to feel like a film score, that somehow that we exist out of time. We watch you play the game, we rewind time, and then we write the score so that the musical hits happen right when like when you're doing battle in Wind Waker. It's like every strike is on the beat of the music. How the hell did they do that, right? And you don't even think about it because it sounds so cool. It's like, well, of course I'm fighting. I'm a tune-shaded, a knight. I'm fighting. I'm fighting a bokoblin, and of course, every time I hit him, it goes boom, 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 and that's right on beat with the music, right? So not noticing it doesn't mean that it's not working.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, I would love to see that video of about the Breath of the Wild, because I have a music background myself, and so like just to see some of the things that I may not have noticed, and being a huge Zelda fan, because that's what I was going to talk about regarding adaptive music. I thought Breath of the Wild did such a good job with it, and like one of my favorite examples is like when Cass is nearby, and you've just got like that ambient sound, and then all of a sudden you just hear Cass's music playing in the background, but it hasn't fully taken over yet, and then that's when you realize, you know, he's nearby, and so then it's like, oh my gosh, Cass is here, and so like that kind of guides you where to go, and you start following the sound, and then, you know, it gets louder and louder as you get to him. And it's, you know, similar like with when you get the Guardians, you get like just that emotional rush as soon as you hear the sound, when it's just that nice ambient sound, then all of a sudden you just hear that just simple piano, and just panic goes through you because you know what's around. And I would love to see something similar to that in Metroid. Like maybe if you're trying to find like an artifact or something, maybe that would be like the way Cass did or something. Or, you know, if they brought back Emmys, do like kind of the Guardian style with that. I thought that would be really cool.
Yeah, it would be amazing. The thing to understand about it is that it requires a whole nother layer of effort, or several layers of design and production. And the power of music is that a piece of music can immediately affect your emotions instantly, right? You just put a decent piece of music on, and I can make you feel something, right? And you can't do that visually. I mean, I can put a shocking image in front of you, or a beautiful image, but it won't necessarily change your emotion that much in the moment. But music can actually change your emotion. So it goes straight into whatever part of the lizard brain is at the amygdala or something, that, you know, that where we experience emotion, and that's the power of music. So I remember Marty O'Donnell, the composer for Halo, talking with us at DigiPen about his approach to the music of Halo and Destiny and adaptive music design. And he was saying that you can overthink it. And so I kind of go back to Steph's sort of point about, you know, is it worth it? And he said, it's not worth it if it isn't good enough, if it isn't as good, if it doesn't make good music. So it's really hard to make adaptive music be as powerful as just a well-through composed piece of music. So in the hands of a good composer, or even just a medium good composer, you know, not even a great composer, but just a good composer, can write a piece of music that will follow an emotional arc. But to do that adaptively now, what adaptive music takes away from the composers is the control of time. And you could argue that that's what it means to compose music, is that I'm manipulating time, right? I'm manipulating sound impulses over time. And so I need to set up gestures, right? I set up things with a string pad, with a crescendo, and then I bring it to the culmination with a cymbal crash, let's say. And if that cymbal crash has to coincide with an event, when the door opened or with a sword hit or whatever, then I have to go back in time. I can't do that. So it's easy with adaptive music to end up with music that's really bland, for example, if it's not done well. And I've been guilty of this myself, where certain techniques for adaptive music, one of them is we call a horizontal resequencing, and that's sort of a linear approach that you're saying, well, it's going to play this piece, this loop for this amount of time, and then upon a certain trigger, it's going to transition maybe at the beat or the bar, the measure boundary, to another piece of music that's in the same tempo. So at least it'll sound kind of seamless. And then there's vertical layering, which is to say I'm going to have a piece of music, and it's also called reorchestration, where instead of you're going to hear it first, and it's going to have drums, bass, and guitar, and then and piano, and then when something changes in the game, now the piano is going to get switched with a Fender Rhodes, let's say, or it was acoustic piano in one state. So that's the same notes are playing, but now they're playing by different instruments. So these techniques, if they're misused, you can end up with really bland music, that because you're trying to make it seamless in the transition. And if you listen to great music, like listen to John Williams' music in the Star Wars series or anything Indiana Jones, and listen how abrupt and crazy his changes are. I mean, it's like in a battle scene, the music goes bum ba-dum ba-dum ba-dum. And then it goes really slow and quiet, and all of a sudden it jumps up, right? It's totally chaotic. It can be, right? And so seamless not all music needs to be seamless, right? So that's a pitfall of writing adaptive music, because if you're too concerned with having it be seamless, you can rob it of any character because you're avoiding landmarks that you'll recognize, on next time around on the loop. But it's like landmarks are why you're listening to the music in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. Like I just like hearing all the insight on it because it's just so interesting how like it's adaptive music works so well because you don't notice it so many times, and I think that's what's so cool about it.
Oh, there's Breath of the Wild, Amanda. You get me started. That Scruffy video, by the way, it's there. It's just search invisible sound
Thank
design.
you.
Invisible sound design in Breath of the Wild. You'll find there. It's the guy's Scruffy. Since we're on the topic, whether or not you use it, it's there's another thing that he talks about there, which is so brilliant. So when you go into any town in Breath of the Wild, there are each major town has its own musical theme. It has its own music. Each of those towns that has its own music, which is all the major towns in the game, has two versions. And they're not really versions. They're really two different pieces of music. It has the daytime music and it has the nighttime music. Okay? And if you stay in the town through dusk or dawn, the music will transition from daytime to nighttime or nighttime to daytime utterly seamlessly. And I don't mean like crossfade. I'm talking about through composed utterly seamlessly. And the way they did it was, if you imagine two loops of equal length, they're both, let's say 2 minutes long or 5 minutes long or however long. There's the day theme and the night theme. And in those loops, there are a specific number of exit points, possible exit points. Not that many, 2 or 3 at dusk, one at dusk and one at dawn. And if you are, or a couple of them, they have to be, if you think about it logistically, it gets complicated. And this, by the way, is what music design is about, not music composition, but music design, which requires music composition to make it work. So you have exit points so that at this point in the loop in the daytime, if the player happens to still be in town, they haven't left the town and crossed the threshold at which they're no longer going to hear the town music. Now they're going to hear the field music. But if they're still in town, then when you get to that point in that piece, in the daytime piece, it's at measure 32, whatever it is, it will automatically transition. It will choose to transition to the nighttime theme. But that transition is a custom composition that is meant to connect the two pieces. And you understand? So that those transitions are pre-composed and are fixed in time. And so it's kind of like an off-ramp on the freeway. If you miss it, then you have to wait for the next off-ramp. And so these transition points are how, if you next time you play Breath of the Wild, just do it. Just go into the Kakariko village and just hang out, and just from the transition from day to night and night to day.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that, and I love that analogy. That is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, you have to wait for the next off ramp if you miss it, and they're spaced tastefully. So and what you give up there is the instantaneous correlation of time, so that you say, the sun went down, and I'm still hearing the daytime music. Well, in order to have custom transitions at every measure, you think of how much music you'd have to write. And by the way, I'll mention that on Wave Race Blue Storm, when it was in development, we developed an adaptive music system like that ourselves. We got a patent on it too. It's hanging in my office. I'm very proud of it. It's a Nintendo patent, but it was for an adaptive music system. And so what it was the weather in Wave Race. As you went around on each of the different courses, the weather could be sunny, or it could be foggy, or it could be stormy. And it depended on, I don't remember what triggered the weather. It was random or just over time or whatever. But so we developed an adaptive music system that was exactly like that. It had off ramps and transition points, but it was so time consuming to write for this. It was MIDI based that we had to abandon it. It was like I would have still been composing music for Wave Race Blue Storm to try to get all those transitions. It just, there's better ways to do it now, and the way they've done it in Breath of the Wild is one of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you said, is it really a big deal if they have to wait a second or two to get a transition point in the music? Not really. So I guess it's a bit of a balancing act between, getting those instantaneous things, those times where you really want something to play at a certain time, and, taking some liberties to create something that's a bit more seamless.
Well, exactly, but it depends on what the event is. So a counter example of that is when you fail, when you die in a game, right?
Yeah.
When you die in a video game, that musical transition has to happen immediately. You can't wait for the next off ramp, right? I mean, think about it. You've got battle music playing, and you get the the fatal blow or whatever it is. Your hit points go to 0, and you're dead, right? And so something's going to happen now, right? You're not alive anymore. So that's probably one of the more extreme examples where the interactivity has to be. It has to be more abrupt. And so that means you have to design your music differently. A lot of times you can cover those up like with a cymbal crash or a big drum hit or something, but it's a different approach than to, well, we're going to have music that's reflecting the time of day, which is much more fluid. And you can take, as you said, Steph, you can take more liberties with it.
Yeah, indeed.
All right, well, last episode, we asked you guys what accessibility improvements would you like to see added to the Metroid games in the future? And here's what you guys had to say. Okay, here's one from That Metroid Guy. Remappable controls is one of the few major criticisms I have of Dread. Field of view sliders for the Prime games, options to adjust music, sound effects, and or voices, UI customization, disable HUD. There's so much more, but I can't think off the top of my head.
Those are fantastic suggestions as well. Like,
I agree.
I think I may have mentioned it in the previous podcast that we did, but to have the option of changing the audio sound effects and adjusting those was really nice. And also, again, just being able to view more of the screen, or, I covered a lot last time, but those are really good suggestions.
Jacob Kennedy Frost says, I think we can all agree that bosses need to have better hitboxes. I like being able to actually damage a boss from all angles, regardless of how I'm aiming or what weapon I'm using. Corpius from Dread is the best example of this, since his hitbox is way incredibly small. That might be good for like the difficulty changes. Like if you want to put it on like a higher difficulty, then the hitbox gets smaller. But if you want to put it on like easy difficulty, then the hitbox is bigger. Let's see, MetaX says, I know it's crazy, but imagine if Metroid games could have control remapping. Also might need a change to the way beams work in SR/Dread, or Samus Return/Dread. The mechanic itself isn't bad, but it encourages unhealthy mashing. Let's see. Oh, and even came up with some solutions. These are a couple of possible paths to solve the beam issue. Give beam some sort of rate limit or auto fire. Make all bosses immune to uncharged beam, like in older games. And make sure the DPS of missiles is better than the DPS of beam spam. Yeah, a lot of people definitely want the controller mapping. I hear a lot of people talk about that for like games just in general.
Yeah, it's interesting, the idea of customization and accessibility. I think I agree with you. These are really great suggestions. There is, I'll mention it because it's a discussion I've had with my colleagues in the industry as audio directors in particular, and as sound designers, but really as audio directors. And it's an extreme argument, so I'm not saying that this is true, but it'll give you an insight into maybe from the creative side of what it feels like. If you think about when a film director makes a film, right? One of the things they're doing, look at a great film like Apocalypse Now, and it's using the sound design, Walter Murch, the legend in the industry who won an Oscar for his sound design for that movie. And he's working with the director, Francis Ford Coppola, to mix the music and the sound effects and the dialogue so that the movie looks and sounds a very specific way, right? Now, granted, it's originally going to play in a theater, which has a very expensive sound system and all. But even so, it's eventually going to go to DVD or TV or streaming, and you're going to listen to it on your home system. And, I don't think anybody would argue, well, maybe they would, that you should be able to adjust the relative level of the music or the sound or maybe the dialogue. I could see for accessibility, you would say if you have a hearing impairment and you can't hear dialogue well, that you'd want to boost the dialogue. But the idea, well, I want to hear more of the music or I want to hear more of the sound effects in a movie, it's kind of at least to me, maybe it's because I'm old, but it seems like an argument that you wouldn't make. But in video games, that seems to be what people like, right? They want to be able to say, oh, I want to turn the music up or turn it down, or turn the sound effects up or down. Or the dialogue, I guess, if there is dialogue. And And I only threw out the point of reference that as an audio director, I mean, that's what my job is to make this experience sound as good as it can on that platform for you. And it's kind of my aesthetic vision of the thing. So if you're going to tell me, well, I don't like your music, I need to turn the music off. I mean, yes, that's totally valid, and the video games are not films, and it's a different experience, and I get that, and it's totally legitimate. But it is, I think, interesting to at least think about it from the other standpoint, is that we spend weeks and months on the mix, right, trying to get the mix so that the game can be as good as it can possibly be.
Yeah, personally, I've definitely played way too many games where you just get a music volume slider and a sound effects volume slider, and that's it. And that's just not enough. Definitely not enough. Honestly, I never thought about that sort of thing being an option in films as well. But now that you've mentioned it, I would love that. There are just so many films and series out there where there's explosions and sound effects and like all sorts of stuff happening really loudly, and then the characters are whispering really quietly to each other because it's intense, and you just barely understand anything, and you don't really get the experience as much as you'd like to. And yeah, subtitles are there, of course, but sometimes it's not just about understanding what they're saying, but how they're saying it and appreciating the voice acting and all of that.
So, but you're talking particularly about dialogue now, right?
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. And I think that's a kind of a unique aspect of things, particularly when you're talking about linear medium, like, but it could be in a game too. It's like, wait a minute, I can't hear the dialogue. In video games, there's, at least in a lot, if not the majority of video games, there's, seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, that there's sort of a move towards, if somebody's saying something in the game, it's also appearing on screen as text, like subtitles in a movie.
Yeah, I've kind of seen that too, yeah.
It's sort of there because in a video game, you need, at least in some cases, you need to know what the dialogue says or you can't do the next thing, right? They just told you something important, right? So, and that's just irritating, and it takes you out of the immersive experience to go, what was the clue that I just missed, right? So it's a slightly different thing, but you're absolutely right that in a movie, if you're missing the dialogue, it's like, and that's a truism for film re-recording engineers, right? That's the people who do the mix in a film, it's the phrase is dialogue is king. And so it's supposed to always be mixed. So with a bias towards dialogue. In other words, you can't cover up dialogue, but clearly that doesn't always happen.
So the question for next episode for you guys, what is your favorite piece of music from the Metroid series? And you can let us know on Twitter or Instagram. Well, everybody, that is it for this episode. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining you. It was such a pleasure just hearing your experience and expertise on everything. It was just so interesting to listen to everything.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Yeah, of course. All right. Well, again, thank you all for listening. You can visit our website at shinesparkers.net, where you can find the interview that we did with Lawrence recently. And we will see you next mission.
See you next mission.
See you next mission.
See you next mission.
And that sort of brings me on to the next question as well about just degrees versus the so I'll just start that again. That sort of brings me on to the next question about no, hold on a second. I'm doing an Amanda now, sorry.
Hey, that's not fair.
No, it's not fair, no. It's usually me that messes up. But basically, degrees versus sort of self-taught.
Wow, Darren,
really.
did you have a concussion?
I did have. Yeah, this is an ongoing joke about concussions. That goes back 2.5 years or so.
I hope it's just a joke. I hope nobody in this group actually had a concussion.
I had a concussion.
Oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I trained in Kung Fu, so it was inevitable. I was going to.
Did you say Kung Fu? Martial arts?
Yeah.
Oh wow. Well, at least it was in a good cause. I mean,
exactly.
At least it wasn't like a bike accident or something where you didn't get anything out of it.
It was me learning things, so there we go.
Good for you.
Learning and then unlearning them a bit as well.
Exactly. I forgot a lot of things for a little while.
Oh my gosh. Hey guys, I got to take a pause here. I need to ask you: are you hearing racket from my end? My wife is vacuuming, and I can hear it. Can you hear it? Because I'm just going to tell her to stop.
Well, it sounds fine to me, but
it sounds okay.
It might be Discord's noise suppression doing some work. Although if it's a constant volume, like
noise removal.
Yeah, it's because the stairs. My studio's in our basement, and the stairs are right up here, and we have a big dog, and she's kind of neurotic about it. I'm just going to go tell her to stop. So can we just take a? I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave.
Sure.
I'm going to leave my recorder running, so we don't have to resync.
Sure.
It's just going to take me
Okay,
30
okay.
seconds. I'll be right back.
No
Thanks.
problem. How am I sounding? Am I sounding pretty much the same? I'm guessing there's been no improvement.
Now it's good, honestly.
Sounding a lot better right
Okay,
now.
okay, well, let's not tempt fate then. It's okay.
Yeah, your previous question with when you were asking a question, it was pretty bad. But
The question
now
was
it's
bad or the
completely-
quality was bad?
No,
Okay.
the question was fine.
All right, I'm back.
Welcome back.
Welcome back.
Okay, so I guess I'm going next. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I had a note for this somewhere. Hold on a second. Lawrence, we're going to need you on for like another 3 podcasts at least. The amount of information that you have and the insights of how deep you answer the questions, it's incredible. But we're going to need like 5-hour podcasts at this point. It's
No,
amazing.
don't do that. Nobody will listen to him. Yeah, you're gonna have to. Feel free to cut this stuff up, man. You know, make it just use the good piece.
No way. This is amazing stuff. I love it. Thank you. No, it's great to hear this. But that being said, did that answer your question there, Steph? I think it probably.
Well, it answered my question and then some. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, Amanda, are you still there? By the way, I've not heard Amanda for like an hour.
I am.
Are you there?
I am
Okay.
here. I was just listening and enjoying everything because it was just so interesting. Yeah, of course. All right. Well, again, thank you all for listening. You can visit our website at shinesparkers.net where you can find the interview that we did with Lawrence recently. And we will see you next mission.
See you next mission. And this is where we all.
Oh, that's where
see
you guys
next
say see you this
mission.
next
Yeah.
mission.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, I'll do it. All right. I was practicing it in front of the mirror earlier. Okay.
Just say see you next mission.
Don't make me laugh when I'm saying it. I'll screw it up.
Think of the editing, Stephan. Think of the editing. Okay.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm ready. See you next mission.
See you next mission.
All right.
There we go. I think that's we've got it. That's
Okay,
good.
cool.
I didn't know if you
That'll
wanted
make
me
the
to.
most awkward.
I didn't know if you wanted me to say it
everyone,
too. So.
Yeah, everyone. Yeah. So that'll make a really interesting blooper at the end. That's fine. The Shinesparkers Podcast is edited by Darren Kerwin, Stephan Wells, and Giulio Bruschini, with music from Maserati. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can download more episodes at shinesparkers.net/podcast. You can also listen to us on Spotify and other podcast platforms. For the latest Metroid news, community features, and exclusive content, you can find us at shinesparkers.net, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. See you next mission.